It should come as no surprise that we here at Star Wars Reading Club have a love for Star Wars legends. With this acting as a catalyst, we've decided to embark upon a full examination of the Old Republic era from Legends. This won't be a mere look at the era from the Old Republic video games. While that material will certainly be included, our review will include more than 25,000 years of galactic history. From the rise of the Tion Cluster in the First Great Schism to the Mandalorian Wars and the Seventh Battle of Ruusan, we'll look at all of it, every major event and character that helped shape the Old Republic into what it was by the time of the era of the films. In our first episode here, we'll examine the origins of the Old Republic era itself. Building off of our Prelude episode, we'll look at the roots that pushed a few worlds in the galactic core to unify and lay the foundations for a government that would come to span billions of star systems across the galaxy. I highly recommend the Prelude for a thorough review of pre-Republic history. I first want to thank the Patreon members of the channel for their support in making projects like this possible. It is so greatly appreciated. And with that, let's take a look at Star Wars as it existed more than 25,000 years before the films, and understand the rise and origins of the era known as the Old Republic. The era of the Old Republic, which officially began with the signing of the Galactic Constitution that codified the institutions of the Republic, was born not out of peace and prosperity, but violence, destruction, and slavery. It would be this painful history that would unify a small number of planets, hoping to never again experience the tragic way of life that was inflicted upon them for millennia. The source of this pain was the species known as the Rakata, and ultimately, their infinite empire that would reach across the galaxy to enforce their will. Originating upon the planet of Lahan within the unknown regions of the galaxy, the Rakata benefited from their early interactions with another species known as the Qua, who arrived upon Lahan in roughly 36,453 BBY. From these interactions, the Rakata received advanced technology, including technology that allowed them to travel the galaxy. Even more importantly, the Rakata were taught about the Force, the mystical energy that allowed them to achieve feats previously thought unimaginable. But unlike the Qua, the Rakata would use these new understandings to spread horror across the galaxy. The Rakata's aggression and desire for both war and conquest saw them use their new technologies to dominate the other worlds within the unknown regions, slowly building a new galactic government known as the Infinite Empire. Expanding out from their homeworld of Lahan, the Rakata would soon set their sights on the galaxy's known regions. While it would be the technology of the Qua that would allow the Rakata to expand their reach across the galaxy, it was the Rakatan Starforge, a massive automated shipyard, that would give them the means to create the most powerful army the galaxy had ever seen, and dominate countless worlds. At its height in the millennia between 30,000 and 25,800 BBY, the Infinite Empire controlled 500 worlds across the galaxy, including Corellia, Coruscant, Dathomir, Duro, Hoth, Kashyyyk, and Yavin. Because their dark-side-fueled technologies could only locate and travel to worlds that were strong with the Force, the Empire was restricted in some sense of the word. But when the Force Hounds of the Rakata were able to find these planets rich in the Force, their native populations were exposed to the full might and horror of the Infinite Empire. This devastating experience was seen perfectly in the example of Tatooine. Once a lush world of seemingly endless oceans and jungles, Tatooine would be completely transformed after the arrival of the Rakata. After the planet's invasion in 25,793 BBY, the Rakata conquered and enslaved Tatooine's inhabitants, also pulling many of the worlds conquered by Tatooine itself into the Infinite Empire. Worse, after a failed rebellion that looked to push back the Rakata, the most dominant force in the galaxy responded by decimating Tatooine through relentless orbital bombardment. Tatooine's rich oceans were literally boiled away, its surface turned into glass that would ultimately break down and cover the planet in its infamous, almost endless layer of sand. At this point, it looked as though the Infinite Empire would be exactly that, a perpetual presence upon the galaxy that through advanced technology and knowledge of the Force, subjected its inhabitants to cruelness and enslavement of the worst kind. But the Rakata's infinite empire would ultimately fracture, and given its millennia-long reign, its dominance was all but swept away from the galaxy in only a few short centuries. By 25,200 BBY, the powerful empire built by the Rakata imploded. The first stage of its demise was defined by internal struggles. While there had been constant tensions that existed between different factions for millennia, these tensions erupted into a destructive civil war, pitting Rakata against Rakata. However, that was only the beginning. Worse than their own internal divisions, the Rakata were completely undone by a plague that rapidly decimated the entire species. Not only did the plague initially kill countless Rakata to the point where their empire was almost unraveled by the sheer loss of numbers, but the plague also caused the Rakata to lose their once powerful connection to the Force. In an instance, the Rakata Infinite Empire was brought to its knees. Its rapid expansion halted immediately as millions of Rakata perished. The loss of the Force trapped many Rakata on their conquered worlds, now unable to use their technology to travel the galaxy, while others were forced to retreat back to Lahan in whatever way they could. To make matters worse for the Rakata, the species who'd been enslaved throughout the galaxy at once recognized the weakness in their overlords. Regaining a newfound sense of their own agency and empowerment, these species rose up against the Rakata, mounting large-scale insurrections against the Empire to reclaim their freedom. Ultimately, the Infinite Empire was driven into submission, and by 25,200 BBY, many of the former worlds once dominated by the Rakata had succeeded in driving them from their homeworlds. In ruin, the nearly decimated Rakata were forced to abandon their conquests and the empire which had once dominated the galaxy, retreating to the safety of Lahan within the unknown regions. Here, the Rakata would slowly fade into obscurity and insignificance, with much of their conquests removed from the pages of history. With the long history of the Rakata finally removed in only a few generations, the species who'd been scarred by the traumas of the Infinite Empire turned to the difficult task of securing their liberation and rebuilding their homeworlds. And rebuild they did. Coruscant was a shining example of how these once dominated worlds emerged from the era of the Infinite Empire and overcame the deep wounds left by the Rakata. Like was seen on many of the free worlds, the humans of Coruscant banded together, constructing vast industries to expand and strengthen their defenses, pledging to fight as one if the cruelty of the Rakata should ever return. Overcoming all odds, Coruscant would flourish in the aftermath of their former enslavement. As their economy and population grew, the future galactic capital committed itself to an expansion of its own, not to dominate other civilizations, but to find new resources to continue the growth of its prosperity. This began the first steps on a path that would ultimately culminate in the creation of the Galactic Republic, as a new era of space travel would work to bring the worlds of the galactic core together. But the space travel capabilities of those on Coruscant were both extremely dangerous and inefficient in the decades after the fall of the Rakata. The best technology available to the planet was known as sleeper ships, an extremely inefficient method of space travel. Colonists were placed in suspended animation and then flown to distant planets in journeys that would take centuries, as succeeding generations would monitor the sleeper ship's progress back on Coruscant. It was the catastrophic failure known as the Flight of the Locani Dawn that would push the scientists of Coruscant to find new technologies in the area of space travel. After multiple generations of Coruscant scientists monitored the sleeper ship Locani Dawn slowly march across space looking for new planets, they could only watch in horror as the ship and its crew of colonists were disintegrated by an undetected meteor shower. Although almost 2 centuries of progress had been lost, the failure of the Locani Dawn would usher in a new age of space travel, and represent a major step towards the unity of the core worlds and the beginning of the Old Republic era. Coruscant would revolutionize space travel after developing a new technology known as hyperspace cannons. While they required a network of cannons to be built, starships could now travel at faster than light speeds between any 2 devices, making space travel far more efficient and safe. But more importantly, the development of hyperspace cannons meant that Coruscant would come into contact with other highly populated planets within the galactic core, including Corellia, Alderaan, and Duro. Having shared a common heritage through their enslavement by the Rakata, these worlds forged an instant union and alliance, each dedicated to the protection of everyone's interests. But while the hyperspace cannons now connected these worlds and helped to foster these shared ideals, these original core worlds weren't satisfied to stop there. They were still searching for the technology that was used by the Rakata, that which allowed for travel across the galaxy. And it would be the combined efforts of these core worlds that would finally make this much needed breakthrough. A team comprised of Corellians and Duros worked to reverse engineer the advanced hyperdrive technology of the Rakata. The technology that had once worked to enslave these planets would now be used to bring them together in ways that were previously seen as unthinkable. With the advent of safe and efficient interstellar space travel through hyperdrive technology, the entire populated core worlds were now suddenly linked together. While their conquering of the Rakata had previously brought them together through ideology, their conquering of space now forged a natural spatial alliance as well. These worlds achieved immense prosperity through their newfound freedom, and were now committed to ensure that freedom was never again threatened. Out of their shared history of slavery and despotism, these core worlds pledged that they would never again be enslaved by anyone, willing to fight together to protect themselves. In the year 25,053 BBY, this alliance was made official as the core worlds founded the Galactic Republic through the signing of the Galactic Constitution on Coruscant, thereby ushering in the era of the Old Republic. The founding worlds of the Galactic Republic were granted the status of core founder, which included the planets of Kuat, Alderaan, Corellia, Chandrila, Humbarine, Anaxis, and of course, the newly established capital of the Republic, Coruscant. The constitution signed by these core worlds set out the powers and rights that were to be enjoyed by the Republic's members. Legislative and executive powers were vested within the Galactic Senate, where elected and appointed representatives from across the Republic would make decisions and come up with solutions to problems within the government, primarily pertaining to trade, exploration, and defense. The Constitution also gave judicial powers to the Supreme Court, and named the elected Supreme Chancellor as both head of state and head of government. Demonstrating just how important the shared experience of the Rakata was, the Constitution also included a clause known as the Rights of Sentience. This clause ensured that all sentient lifeforms within the Republic were treated as equal, expressly outlawed slavery, and promised that all citizens were entitled to the rights enumerated under the Constitution. In many ways, this clause alone formed the Republic's foundation, that which would bring together the many worlds of the core under the ideals of freedom, justice, and democracy, those which would define the Republic for millennia. With the signing of the Galactic Constitution and formation of the Republic, the era of the Rakata Infinite Empire officially crumbled, and the era of the Old Republic began. Friendship among the core and hope for shared prosperity was the new standard, and these worlds were brought together by hyperdrive technology. But there was a group knowledgeable about the Force just like the Rakata, who grew in their own ideals and strength hidden away within the deep core of the galaxy, as all of this was happening within the core worlds. In our next episode, we'll look at how this group of Force sensitives, who represented the earliest vestiges of the Jedi Order, came into contact with the Galactic Republic, ultimately becoming its guardians of peace and justice. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of our series looking at the complete history of the Old Republic era. If you'd like to support our work, please consider becoming a patron of the channel through Patreon, where you'll gain access to Patreon-exclusive content. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and as always, may the Force be with you.